Today we're going to make the Petals Prose Book cover by Kimberbell. Isn't it beautiful? This is a machine, embroidery, and sewing machine project. You can complete this probably in 2 to 3 hours. It took me longer because I'm filming. Get your instructions, get your project kit, and let's sew this up together. Your files are delivered directly to your digital library. Your kit has all the beautiful fabric, project batting, and this is the elastic. Let's get started. When you work with the Kimberbell kits, the first thing you want to do is go through your instructions. Look at your fabric, the sizing, the kind of stabilizers you're going to need. They tell you how many pieces and what size you need to cut. One thing that's very convenient about this kit, this does say fat 16th and tells you to cut it into 5 2x4 pieces. In the kit, they gave you everything pre-cut. But you want to keep your instructions. If you want to go back and make this with a different fabric, you just follow these instructions and these measurements, and you can pick out your own fabrics if you want to change the color. We'll start with part 1, stitching the pieced block. You can see that's here. And it does tell you to put the fusible backing on certain pieces. So 3, 6, 9, 12. These are fabric 3. I'm going to go ahead and do all of my fabric prep. Go ahead and grab your fusible backing. You want to roll some out, and we're going to put our white fabric scraps on the fusible backing. These are solid fabrics. They don't necessarily have a right and a wrong side. I've pre-cut them to the size specified in the instructions. I'm going to go ahead and lay all of these strips out. Then we'll trim the fusible backing and take it over to the ironing board and press this down. I'm using a pressing cloth to cover my fabric strips because I don't have them bumped up right next to each other. I don't want to get any of the sticky from the fusible on my iron. Everything is pressed down. You might be wondering why you're using the fusible only on this color of fabric. If you look at your instructions, look at the picture, see how the colored fabric alternates with the white. Putting that fusible backing behind the white fabric will prevent the other colors from showing through. Next, you need to cut your fabrics 1, 2, and 4 to the size in the instructions. This piece of fabric is used for the book cover and for the lining. It's nice and long. You need to cut 6 2x4 pieces. It's just over 12 inches, just a hair. So if I measure a 4-inch wide piece, then I have 4x12, and I'll be able to cut that into 6 2-inch sections. Let's go ahead and do that. And then you want to go ahead and fold this up and set this aside. You'll cut your lining later. You don't trim it now because it's going to be measured based on another part of the project. Let's go ahead and fold that, set that aside. This is just like cutting for a quilt. If you've ever made a quilt and you have to cut all your quilt blocks, it's the same thing. So there's a little prep involved. Don't be intimidated by it. It's nothing difficult. Just follow the instructions. Let's cut our 2-inch pieces, and we'll end up with 6 2-inch pieces. Let's talk about fabric 4. Do you see it has the 2 stars next to it? You want to go to the bottom and look for the 2 stars. It says, in our sample, this fabric is directional. Cut the front flap fabric and the quilted block fabric so that the straight lines in the fabric run parallel to the long edge. And then it tells you can refer to the cutting diagrams PDF. You need 5 by 10.5 and then 3 6 by 10.5. Right on the bottom you can see this has 12 inches indicated. So if you look at your big piece of fabric, it's really long and it's telling you you have 12 inches. This is 12 inches. See? I'm going to cut a 6, a 6, a 6, and a 5, and they only need to be 10.5. So if you want, you can add all of that up and cut the 10.5 piece, or cut each piece and then trim to 10.5. That's what I'm going to do. Since this is 12 inches, I'm going to cut a 6 inch, a 6 inch, a 6 inch, and a 5, and then I'll trim them all down to 10.5. Now I'm cutting my project batting. I need a 4 by 10.5, a 2 by 10.5, and 3 5.5 by 10.5 pieces. This piece is 11 inches long, so that makes that easy. I'm not going to worry about that extra ½ inch. So I already cut my 4. This is how I set up for doing the Kimberbell projects. I make sure I've got a space. This is part of a sewing cart. All my fabrics are labeled. I've got my batting, I've got the elastic, my thread choices, my little holder for my pattern, paper tape, scissors, and my embroidery machine is tucked away in a corner. It's a bit of a squeeze, but I can get a chair in there. Let's get started. I'll be using my Baby Lock Pathfinder today. If you happen to be using a Baby Lock machine or a Brother machine, the screen will be extremely similar to my screen. I'm going to hit my embroidery edit. I need to import my design. I have it on my Turtle USB. Isn't he cute? Here's how I'm importing the design on this machine. It's on the USB. It's plugged in right here. I'm going to hit USB. I have a lot of stuff on here. I have a folder for Kimberbell. I'm going to look for the Bookish projects. This one that says Book C, that's probably book cover. I have a couple things on here. It is, I can tell by looking at it. Now I have to select the correct design. I'm looking for the design that looks like this. Let's find that one. I think it's this one. Alright, here's my design. Now that my design is imported, I press the Set button. This tells me the size of the design. I'm going to need my biggest hoop for this one. That's what it's telling me. And I do want to show you something. Now it's ready to start. Let's say I wasn't paying attention and I grabbed the wrong size hoop. Let's put on a hoop that's too small. So you can see that I need a large hoop. I put a small hoop on and I went ahead and loaded it, closed it. And to start embroidering on this machine, you put your foot down and then that red button turns green. Do you see how it's not turning green? Then I know something's wrong. And I can look at my screen and say, oh look, I didn't pick the right size hoop. Let's go ahead and get the correct hoop on there. I put my biggest hoop on here. This is the 8 by 12. You can see the space that I need for this design. Let's drop the foot. See how the light turned green? That's my correct size hoop. Before we start, we need to get our stabilizer in here. The instructions tell you to use light mesh cutaway. It's available from Kimberbell in 2 different sizes. They have these pre-cut 10 by 12, which are great for any projects with a 5 by 7 hoop, but you can see that it's not going to fit. It's too small for this. It also comes on a roll. So this is the light mesh cutaway. That's what I'm going to need for this project because it needs to be on this big hoop. It's wide enough this way. I just need to make sure it's long enough, give myself enough so I can tug on it when it's in the hoop. And we'll get that tightened down. I'll show you how to hoop your stabilizer. I have my piece cut large enough for my hoop. I slide that over. I need to loosen. Now these hoops happen to go up and down like this where the screw is. You can pull it up to loosen. When it's down, that's supposed to be the lock position. Take that piece out. I'm going to lay this down over the bottom part of the hoop. And I'm going to put this back on. I want to make sure that I've got enough on all sides. And I do. I'm going to push that down. I'm going to hand tighten it a little bit. And then I'm going to do pull. Start to make sure it's tighter inside the hoop. I'm going to tighten it more. I'm going to pull again. Go. Now that's as tight as I can get with my hand. I've learned from doing a number of projects that you do want to go ahead and get a screwdriver and tighten this down, because I've had the hoops separate. You don't want that to happen. I'm going to grab a screwdriver and we're going to tighten this. And I'm going to give another tug, make sure that my stabilizer is in there. I don't have any wrinkles. Everything looks good, nice and tight. We are ready to embroider. We'll walk through the entire project together. Some parts of the project are going to be a little repetitive, like this with the fabric. We're going to be putting fabric down and trimming. So I'll show the first couple times we do that, and then you'll either see still pictures or sped up video. We're going to start with stitching the batting placement line. Then you'll put your project batting over the line, stitch a tack down line, and trim. You can see step one just looks like a box. That's going to be my placement line. My machine sometimes imports the colors correctly, sometimes a little funny. I think each machine is a little different, but I've got my threads ready and we'll follow the instructions. Let's go ahead and do the placement line. Now we have our placement line stitched. We want to cover this with our batting and then stitch the tack down line. You can pull your frame out and do that, or you can just do that on the bed of your machine. I'm just going to leave it on the bed of my machine and slide my batting under and tape it. I've used some of the Kimberbell paper tape on the side and on the top over there just to make sure this doesn't slide. Make sure you cover your placement line stitches. Let's go ahead and stitch this down. I have the hoop off my machine because now I need to trim the excess off. I'm going to use a pair of duck-billed scissors, and I'll show you how I do that. These are the kind of scissors you want to use when doing the projects like this. They're called duck-bill. The little round piece right here protects your stitches as you trim so you don't accidentally cut through your stitches. Now I'm right-handed, so it's on this side. They make left-handed ones. I know this is the extra that needs to come off. There's my stitch line. Let me see if there we go. And I just want to trim close to it. It doesn't have to be right, like immediately on top of it. Close to it will be good, because there's going to be other stitches that we'll do. I'm going to pick this up and show you, that are going to seal off that edge. I'll go ahead and trim all the way around. One thing I noticed about this placement line, it didn't go around and make a complete rectangle. It left a little piece open. Also, don't worry if it's not completely even. You can certainly go through and even out. Again, this is all going to get fabric put on top of it and be quilted and assembled. So if it's not perfectly straight, don't worry about it. Next, we're going to stitch the piecing template. and then we're going to be working on placing our fabric. Piecing template, the machine goes straight down the line. Let's take a look at this. See the line? It actually closed off. I can go back and I can get rid of this little extra piece and this little extra piece. It's got your lines where we're going to be placing our fabric, and it also did an outline outside the batting line. This will all be in the instructions. All these little lines are going to help you place your pieces of fabric. We're going to start with one of our fabric one pieces, place it right side up, covering section 1. Shows you right here, this is section 1, the little triangle at the bottom. Then we'll stitch a trimming placement line. We'll trim the fabric, and then we'll be going to the next fabric. Let's do these steps. Here's your section 1. You want to put your fabric down and cover that. You see you have plenty of fabric. I'm going to put a piece of the paper tape on it. The instructions don't say you have to do that, but I'm going to do that anyway. Let me make sure I'm completely covering the little triangle. I am. We're going to go ahead, make sure that's flat, and we're going to stitch our trimming and placement line. Looking at your instructions, we stitch the line. We're going to want to trim that piece off. I have this flipped so the top of the hoop is facing me because I'm going to use these scissors again. I want the duckbill to protect the part of the fabric I'm going to keep. We need to get rid of this piece here. Just like that. And then the next step, I'm going to go and flip the hoop. You can see where we've trimmed. Our next step is to place a piece of fabric 2 right side down. Now note that this we did right side up. Fabric 2 is going to go right side down. You're going to center it along this placement line. Shows you right here, right side down, center, line it up on that stitch line. You don't want your fabric sticking over, not touching. You're going to line it up right along that line. Then we're going to put it on the machine and stitch the next part. You stitch down your line. It tells you to flip the fabric right side up. Press well. And it does tell you to use a mini iron or finger press along the seam lines. You just don't want your iron to touch your hoop. If you're using a mini iron, make sure you remove your hoop from your machine. Press it on an ironing board. I'm going to go ahead and finger press. I have a little roller that will help too. I'll show you that. Rather than pull this off and iron it every time, which you can do, that's absolutely fine, I'm going to go ahead and use the finger press option, and then I'm going to use this little roller. This one is by Clover. It's plastic, it's small, and it's easy to get in here. I also have a larger wooden roller. I rolled it down. All you do with this type of tool is just sort of roll. It does make it nice and flat. Next we're going to stitch the trimming placement line, and we're going to trim off fabric and then place the next fabric. You can see that the same thing is going to happen over and over and over again. Let's go ahead and stitch this and trim it together, and then we'll do another piece together. This is what needs to be trimmed off. So I want my duck bill on this side. I'm going to go ahead and flip. You always want the bill protecting the part of the fabric that you're keeping. I'm going to go ahead and trim this. We're right here, number 17. Place fabric 3, right side down, centered along the placement line. Now if you remember from the beginning, fabric 3 is the light colored fabric. You'll be able to tell right from wrong side because we put that fusible on the back. So we're going to place this right side down, centered along the placement line. It's going to go like that. And I'm going to just tape it because I'm moving back and forth since I'm placing it here on the table. I don't want to have to go back, put it on the machine and have it move. It's ready to go. I'm going to go back to the machine and stitch the next line. You're going to do the same thing before and flip your fabric. I've got that little piece of tape here. I'm going to take that off, flip the fabric, and I will use my roller and I'll roll along this seam, or if you're pressing, make sure you take it off the bed of your machine. I've pressed my seam with my roller. Now we're going to stitch another trimming and placement line. So just like before, we stitched that trimming and placement line. We're going to trim off the excess and we're going to line up another piece. We're going to do the blue fabric. You'll stitch it down, you'll flip it, you'll press it. I'm going to work to this point and then resume filming. Everything is pressed. I went ahead and put a little bit of the paper tape up here to hold these pieces down. Again, you can take it to your ironing board and mini iron and go ahead and press that. If you look at the next step, here's where we are, number 85. We're going to be stitching some trimming guides. The little eyeball here means to use a thread that you can see. I can see the thread I'm using. I'm using the linen color. I'm only using 2 color threads, so I use the linen color for this entire piece. We are going to switch to the navy when we get to this piece. You can see on my machine it even changed the thread color to a visible thread color. I could change it to navy right now if I want. I'll go ahead and wait till I get to this step to change to navy. You can always refer back to your screen to make sure it looks like the next step of the project. And this is what we need to stitch. We are good. I went ahead and I switched to navy. Here's the navy. Now comes the fun part. We're going to make the fancy design. Here we go. Next we're going to trim according to the trimming instructions. Before we do that, let's just talk about the design for a minute. When you buy the project kit, you get the design files with it and the fabric. Now that I've used this fabric, if I want to make this project again, like I talked about in the beginning, I can certainly cut all these pieces of different fabric, or you can use this design on one piece of fabric. On your embroidery machine, you could start at the beginning with all the outside placement and tack down lines. Then, I'll show you on my machine. There's a little minus and a plus for the spools. This will advance each color, so it's like skipping a step. These other numbers, -1, +1, if your thread breaks and you have to back up or you want to go ahead, you can do it that way as well. But let's say I really like this design and I want to make the whole piece here white and use blue or green, whatever my favorite color is. So I can start at the beginning and do those beginning steps with the placement and the batting, tack down lines and everything, and I can stitch that and then stitch the next step. And then I would skip this because I wasn't going to do any of the lines. I was just going to use a solid piece of fabric. So then you would just move through your design until you get to this point, and then you would stitch these down and then stitch your embroidery. So that's another option. Remember, whenever you buy a project kit or a product that has the digital download, you get that design file. So you can make another project, you could use it for something else. If you like this and want to use that as a quilt block, you could do the same thing. Let's go ahead and trim. To remove your block from the hoop, trim the block to 3.5 by 9 3/4 as follows. And it tells you to measure 4 7/8 inches from the center tick marks shown in red. They're right there in red. Trim the top edge, measure down 4 7/8 inches, trim the bottom edge, and then trim the long edges on the trimming lines. Let's go ahead and trim our block. I'm going to need to remove it from the hoop, and because I tightened it with a screwdriver, I'm going to need the screwdriver to loosen it. Go ahead and take this apart. Set this aside. Looking at our instructions, we want to measure up 4 7/8 inches from the center tick marks, and they show it in red again. Sorry, camera's this way. Showing in red. And I am actually going to, I'll go ahead and turn it. I can see my tick lines. This is why they tell you to use a visible thread. I'm sure this is not visible on the camera. It's right here. And I want to measure up 4 7/8 and trim, and then measure down 4 7/8 and trim. I happen to have this itty bitty eighths square ruler from Creative Grids. I also have a larger ruler, and it has the eighth marks on it. So I want 4 7/8. It's right there. I need to find my tick line. I can see this one easier without bending down really close, so I'm just going to turn it. If I wasn't filming, I just would have bent down to get to the other one so I could see it. Here's 4 7/8. There's that line right there. I'm going to make sure I'm straight. I'm going to go ahead and trim that. Let me just get the rest of this off. I'm going to turn it again. It's 4 7/8. It's right there. You probably can't see that on camera. I'm going to go ahead and line that up. 4 7/8. I know this extra is going to need to come off. Close your rotary cutter when you set it down. Don't cut your fingers. If you've watched any of my tutorials before, I say that repeatedly because it's worth repeating. Now we're going to trim our long edges of the block on the trimming guide. Right there. And then we're going to set this aside, and we'll start on stitching the front flap. This ruler's a little short for this. I'm going to get a longer ruler. Got one right here. That one will work. And I want to trim that right along the trimming guide. And there's our center piece. I may need to go back and trim that. I didn't get it quite along that line. But for right now, I'm going to set this aside, and we will go ahead and move on to stitching the front flap. We're starting on part 2, stitching the front flap. I went ahead and hooped my stabilizer and loaded my design. Let's stitch our batting placement line onto the stabilizer. Now remember, this box with the lines running through it is neutral thread color. So if you had your navy thread in your machine from this part, make sure you switch your thread back. Here's my design. I changed the thread to the neutral thread color. We're going to go ahead and stitch that placement line. See how it's red? That means something's wrong. That's what's wrong. And I brought up my design and didn't hit set and embroidery. Now it's green. You have your placement line stitched out. You're going to make sure you cover that line with your project batting. If you want, you can put a piece of paper tape down to hold it in place. I'm going to double check. Make sure I'm completely covering that line. Looks good. You can double check the top. Looks good. Let's go ahead and stitch that down. Next, you want to stitch your front flap placement line. Let's go ahead and do that. You can see that this line is bigger than your little strip of batting. It's supposed to be like that. We're going to place our front flap fabric right side up, covering those placement lines we just stitched. It reminds you that the kit uses a directional fabric. The straight lines in the fabric run vertically from the top of the design to the bottom of the design. Then we're going to stitch a tack down line, and we're not trimming it at this time. And note that even though we're stitching on the blue, we're still using the neutral thread. You don't have to change your thread yet. After we place our fabric and tack it down, we're going to do the quilting design and the trimming guide. All done with this part, I'm going to take this out of the hoop and walk over to the cutting table and trim per the instructions. We're ready to trim, and if you read the instructions, we're going 4 7/8 from those center lines, just like before, and then we're going to trim along the lines, just like before. Let's go ahead and do that. Piece is all trimmed. We're going to set it aside. The next part is stitching the quilted blocks. Part 3. Let's start part 3, stitching our quilted blocks. Again, remember, we're going to do this 1, 2, 3 times, and I've got 1, 2, 3 pieces of fabric. You made 3 of these blocks. You trimmed them just like before, following the trimming instructions. Get your ruler with the 7/8 marker and go ahead and trim all 3 of your blocks. On part 4, assembling the book cover. You're going to need your sewing machine to assemble your book cover. All of your pieces are sewn right sides together with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. You need to be sure to backstitch at the beginning and end of stitching. Be sure the quilting detail on the front flap is placed next to the piece block before you sew your blocks together. Today I'll be sewing on my Juki TL 2020 PE. PE is Platinum Edition. It's the same as the 2010 white sewing machine, it's just a different color. I'm going to be using what's called a compensating foot. This came with my machine. It has a 1/4 inch guide. What makes it different from this foot, which is the regular 1/4 inch guide, is the size of the guide on the foot. The compensating foot guide is thicker. That makes the foot lift higher off the sewing machine bed, so it's great for use with quilted fabrics. We're going to start by arranging our pieced block and our front flap as shown here in the picture, making sure that detail on the front flap is next to your piece block. So you want your piece block on this side and your front flap on this side. As you're lining up your pieces, you've got your stitch lines and your marking line right here in the middle. You can use these to help line up your pieces. You've got that line at the top. You want to put them right sides together. I use that tick line in the middle to help place my pin to hold my pieces together. We're going to go ahead and stitch our two pieces together on the sewing machine, right sides together. Make sure everything is lined up. And remember, you want to take a back stitch right after you start. So we'll go forward and then we'll do a back stitch. And then we'll go ahead and continue stitching. When you get to the end, you want to make sure you go ahead and do another back stitch. Next step is to arrange our quilted blocks 1, 2, and 3 in a row together as shown, and then that's going to get attached to our pieced block unit. You want to check the orientation of your 3 blocks before you sew them together. Let's look at the pictures and the instructions. You can see here that the upper left corner has the smaller flowers, and they repeat that layout. I've got this one on the right correct, but the other two need to be flipped. So I'm going to turn everything around and make sure all my blocks are in the proper orientation before I sew them together. I'm back at the sewing machine, and this time I'm using 3 pins. I want to make sure everything is held together nice and secure. It's a little slippery on the sewing machine surface. Remember to go back and forth at the beginning and the end of each of your stitching segments. Got the first 2 together. Let's have a look. Everything looks nice. We're going to go ahead and attach our next piece. I'm going to use that center line again to help line it up. Right there, use that line. Line those 2 little tick marks up and go ahead and pin. Once everything is pinned together, you're going to sew it just like before. Make sure you do that back stitch at the beginning and the end of your sewing. The next step is arranging the quilted blocks unit and the piece block unit together as shown. This is going to make your book cover. So you want to lay out your fabric pieces just like the picture. My pieced block units on the right and the 3 quilted block units are on the left. We're going to go ahead and put those right sides together and stitch them together. I'm using 3 pins just like before, one at the top, one in the middle, and one at the bottom. Go ahead and do your sewing. Remember to take that back stitch at the top and the bottom of your stitching line. Next, you're going to measure your book cover. You can see they let us know their sample came out 9 3/4 by 20.5. Let's measure and see how close mine is. I'm going to measure the shorter side first. Let me line up my ruler here. And it is just about exact at 9 3/4. So this side came out really good, just as measured in the instructions. Now I can see I've got a little fabric flap here on the end. I'm going to go ahead and line up my ruler and cut that off. Let's go ahead and trim that, and we'll go ahead and get that out of the way. I'll show you how small this piece is. It's a tiny piece of fabric. There you go. Let's measure the long side. You kind of have to squish it down a little bit since we haven't ironed it yet. I'm going to go ahead and put my big ruler down, and let's look and see how close I am. I've got another little bit of fabric here on the side. I'm going to trim that off in a minute, but let's measure first. And it looks good. It's just about 20.5. Let's go ahead and flatten it really nice. Make sure everything is straight. And I'm going to cut off any of those little pieces of fabric that aren't quite straight. I want to make sure to get my piece as straight as possible before I sew everything together. This is just like you're squaring up a quilt block. step is to trim your lining fabric to match whatever measurements you got for your book cover. I got the 9 3/4 by 20 1/2. I'm folding it in half because I can't get 20 1/2 on camera. So I'm cutting that at 10 1/4 because 10 1/4 doubled is 20 1/2. So I'm laying that out until that measures 10 1/4. Looks good. I'm going to double check before I cut, make sure my seam is pressed flat. Make sure that's really nice and flat, and I'm at 10 1/4. Just going to double check that really quick, make sure my ruler's lined up. We're at 10 1/4 there along the top piece of that fabric. I'm going to line up a ruler, get it lined up with the fabric edge, and go ahead and cut. Since 10 1/4 twice is 20 1/2, this will be the correct size. Let's go ahead and cut that. Take your extra fabric. There's quite a bit here. You want to fold that and keep that. There's other projects in here along with the book cover. There's a bonus project. I'll show you that later. So go ahead and fold that, set it aside. Now I need to cut my 9 3/4. I'm grabbing this square ruler that I have because it's got the 3/4 measurement mark that I'm going to need. It's just going to make it easier for me to trim this fabric. I want to make sure I'm lined up at 9 3/4 straight along the top, and we'll go ahead and trim my fabric. Just triple checking, making sure I am 9 3/4 before I cut. Looks good. Go ahead and cut the fabric. I'm going to go ahead and save this strip. I'm sure I can use that for something else. Now we're ready to go on to the next step. I'm going to place your book cover right side up on a flat surface with the front flap at the right. So that's going to be facing me. Here's your front flap, and that'll be facing me over here. Let's go ahead and lay that out. I need to turn this around. There we go. Now my orientation is correct. And then we're going to put the wrong side of the lining fabric on top. So right sides together, pin it down, and stitch them together. I've got my two pieces pinned together. I'm going to go ahead and sew. Make sure you do the forward and back stitch at the top and the bottom of your stitching. Next, we want to unfold the project and press the seam well. The fabric wants to lay in a certain direction, so I'm going to let that lay that way and press the seam toward that light color fabric. And while I'm here at the ironing board, I'm going to go ahead and press out any wrinkles in the lining fabric, and then I will flip over the project and press open the seams on the other side to help it lie flat during assembly. That's not in the instructions, but that's just something that I want to do. So let's get all of our wrinkles out, and then we'll press our seams. I'm going to go ahead and press these bulky seams open. It's going to help my project lie a little flatter. Be careful not to burn your fingers. Again, this is personal preference. This is not part of the instructions. This is just something that I'd like to do. I think it'll also help make the final assembly a little bit easier. Seam wants to go towards me, so I'm just going to press that one that way. The other seams that are bulky, I've pressed open. I'm going to flip my project over, give it a quick press on the top side, make sure everything looks good, then we'll go to the next step. You want to make sure to get your instructions out. It tells you to measure to the left and the right of the seam sewn in step 5. That's that seam right there. Use a water-soluble marker. We're going to make some points. And the same thing here. We're going to measure 11 inches to the right, from the right, vertical mark. Use a water-soluble pen, mark another vertical line from this point. What I'm going to do is measure, and I do have one of the Kimberbell water-soluble markers. You can also use a friction pen, but what I like to do is actually put the paper tape on it and mark on the paper tape so I don't have to go back and spray to get the water-soluble off, or if it's a friction pen, you would go back and iron it off. So this is the seam they're talking about. It talks about the seam and direction step 5. So if you go back to step 5, that was this seam. So here's my seam. going to lay it out just like the picture. They want me to measure 2 1/4 to the left and the right and mark vertical lines. So 2 1/4, 2 1/4, line, line. I'm going to put some tape on it. The line's going to be right next to that quilting. And then go about, 2 1/4 is going to be right about there. You don't have to do this. This is just something that makes it easier for me. I'm going to need to turn this toward me. It's hard to measure sideways. 2 1/4, 2 1/4. That's 2. There's the quarter mark, 2 1/4. I want to follow that all the way down. I'm going to make my mark, and it's going to fall on my tape. Again, this will come off the fabric with a spray of water. This is just a little bit quicker for me. Then I can just peel it off. 2 1/4. Follow it all the way down your seam line. 2 1/4. 2 1/4. Let's look at the next set of directions. I've got it back laid out like the picture. The next set of directions say to measure 11 inches to the right from the right vertical mark. Here's your right vertical mark. And then we're going to make another line. There's my 11. I need to move this up a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and put down tape again. That way I don't have to spray it and get it wet. I'm going to line up my 11 on my line over there. Draw a line. Just pull that a little bit. Same thing, I'm going to line up the 11. Draw a line. Let's go to the next step. We're going to place our elastic strap centered over the vertical line made in direction step 8. That's the one we just did. Be sure the elastic strap extends above and below the top and bottom edges of your project. Tape the elastic securely in place as shown. See how they have it taped? Let's get our elastic, and you're going to center it over this line. One side is flat and one side is shiny. I think the shiny side goes down. That's going to go there and there. So I am going to have to move my tape, but that's fine. I'm going to grab a pin real quick. It's got a nice center line. I'm going to line that up. That way I know it's centered. You can line up the center line. Oh yeah, that's easy. Put the shiny side down, then you can really see that center line. Okay, that's going to need to go there. I'm just going to pin that just for a second. Make sure, yep, that'll work. Straighten that out a little bit. I'm going to do the same thing over here. The reason I'm doing this is because I put the tape down, so now I need to pull the tape up. I'm just going to stick it there for a second to hold it in place. Okay, and now they want you to tape it all the way across, edge to edge. Let me pull my pins out. I'm going to tape it across edge to edge, just like that. Be sure the elastic strap extends above and below. You did. Tape the elastic securely in place as shown. Okay. Mine's extra secure because I got a couple extra pieces there. Read these instructions. I'm going to set this off camera so I can show you what I'm doing, okay? we want to place the cover right side up. I taped it to my cutting board, so everything's right side up. You want your lining right here with the lining to the right. So the lining's to the right, everything is right side up. We're going to fold the quilted side over the lining along the right vertical mark. I'm going to pull this so you can see. Remember, we have these two lines. I need to fold it along this line. And paper tape comes off. You can sew over it and it'll come off. So I'm not worried about that. Need my right line. It's right there. I'm actually going to put a pin in it so I can see it better. Because you're folding over it, you won't be able to see it. So let's put a pin in. Right there. And let's put a pin in this one. Right here. Now I can see my pin. I'm going to go ahead and fold this. And then you're going to take it to your iron and press it. I will go ahead and actually unfold and take that tape off since I'm going to take it to the iron, but before I do that, if you've done the tape, I'm going to finger press it and not poke myself where the pin is, just to make a line in the fabric. And then I'm going to go ahead and pull that out and then take it to the, yeah, I'll be able to see my crease. I'm going to take these out. I know where my lines are because I just creased my fabric. And I'm going to fold it and take it to the ironing board and I'm going to press it. I'm going to go ahead and leave the camera where it is. You're going to press this. I've got that pressed, took it to my iron. Let's go to the next step. You want to go ahead and refer to the instructions. It tells you to clip or pin in place as shown. I'm going to put a couple of pins there. Go ahead and pin. And pin. Here's where we are. You can see that this part, the top, extends beyond your lining. So if you see that, you're fine. We're going to go to the next step. Step 11. It says to fold the quilted side, that's this side, to the left, it's going to go that way, along the seam as shown. So this seam line, where your lining fabric hits that front flap. Let's go ahead and do that. I have to pull it towards me a little bit. So fold the quilted side to the left along the seam as shown so a pleat is created with the first fold. This is your first fold. We just did that. We just folded, we pressed, and we pinned. So that's your first fold. You want to go back this way, and right where, see this seam? Right where these two fabrics meet, you want to go ahead and do that. That's creating the pleat. So that's your pleat. A pleat is created with the first fold. Now it says to fold the quilted side along the left vertical mark, right sides together, align the vertical folds and the edges, press well. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and add an extra pin to hold this. I'm not confident that as I fold something else that that's not going to come out. So I'm going to put an extra pin in. There's that. Okay, we've got it folded, we've got our pleat. I'm on step number 12 if you've got your instructions in front of you. Fold the quilted side, that's this side, along the left vertical mark. Remember this? This is our left vertical mark. Let's go ahead. I'm going to put a pin here. It's going to be easier to see because once I fold it, I'm not going to be able to see this mark anymore. So let me make sure I get that right. I'm going to put this towards me for a moment. I want to put a pin right here. So there's that one. And I'm going to do the same thing on this side. Again, if you drew your line, you can fold and you can see your line. You're good to go. Okay. So if you drew a line, you've got your line. I didn't. I used tape and drew a line. We're going to fold that over. So it says to fold the quilted side along the left vertical mark, right sides together, align the vertical folds and the edges. Okay. So one more time. Here's my vertical line. It's telling me to align my folds. Got it. Don't do this if you're hungry. I'm going to go ahead and pin that down. If you haven't had a snack break, take a snack break before you start this section. We are going to press this, but I want to make sure my edges line up. I'm a little bit off here. I'm not worried about that. Once I press it, it's probably going to come down this way a little bit. I'm going to take this to the ironing board and press that. This is all pressed. Now we're going to align the edges of the cover and the lining, clip or pin. Be careful not to move your folds. So you don't want to move these. I'm glad I pinned those. We're going to pin all the way around. This is showing you that pleat right there. See the pleat? I need to pin all the way around. Let me show you this. See how this looks like it's short? That's because it's not lying flat. If I hold my pleat and then I pull, it lines up. So I'm going to start my pinning over here. I want to make sure I leave some of this open though. I don't want to sew over all this. You need a part to turn your project inside out. Now it's all held together nicely and I've got a start and stop point marked. I'm going to go ahead and pin around the entire project. Everything's pinned. You're going to want to sew around the entire perimeter of the project, leaving a 3-inch opening. After you sew all the way around, you'll trim off your extra elastic strap. After you sew all the way around, and then you'll trim your corners so you can turn it right side out. This helps get rid of some of the bulk. Back at the sewing machine, I'm going to start here and go all the way around and end there. Go ahead and pull up my pins. I'm going to take a couple back stitches. That's so when I'm turning it, I don't accidentally pull the seam out. Let's go all the way around. Okay, we're all the way around. I'm going to cut off the extra, and then I'm going to trim the bulk from the corners and flip it right side out. I'm definitely going to need to get a poking tool to help me. You're going to take your tape off. See how the tape where I sewed, it'll just come right off out of that seam. Don't worry about that. I'm going to do that gently. Ooh, shiny side is down. Okay. I was wondering how that was going to turn out. If it doesn't want to pull, normally it just pulls right off. If it doesn't want to pull, give it a quick snip. See, then it'll pull. It'll come right out from your seam. That's usually what happens. I don't know why it didn't want to pull out. Maybe because I have this extra piece in here. Okay. And then we'll get the rest of the tape off. I've got a little turning tool here that'll help. I did leave a 3-inch opening. I have really big hands. I used to be able to palm a basketball, so if you give yourself 3 inches, you'll be fine. They're about as good as they're going to get. And then I'm going to take this to the ironing board and press it. There's your pleat. That's because your book is going to tuck in. Let's go ahead and press this. I'm going to make sure I press that down real nice. Normally I don't hand stitch. I may hand stitch that. Usually I just put it on the sewing machine and stitch it. But you may want to hide your stitching since you've got two different colors. I'm going to go to the front and make sure that I have all that turned under. Everything's ironed, the dogs are fed and happy. Let's go ahead and close the opening. Top stitch or hand sew opening close. Guess what I'm going to do? We're going to top stitch. I am going to change to a thread to match this fabric though. Closest I have to navy in a 50 weight is black. I don't want to use a 30 weight thread. I think it would stand out too much. And then I kept the light color thread in the bobbin. I'm going to go ahead and put a top stitch as close to the edge of that as I can and seal the opening. I'm all pinned down. I'm just going to top stitch that closed. Today's book is J.R. Ripley's Wedding Thrashers. These are quite a few years old. You can probably find them in secondhand or thrift shops if you like cozies. So lay the book cover on a flat surface. We did that. Set a book on top of the book cover. Slide the front cover into the front flap. Okay, here's your front flap. Here's your front cover. There you go. Slide the back cover under the elastic strap. So the back cover is going to go under the elastic strap. Fold the right edge of the book cover around the back cover and tuck under the strap. Okay, I'm going to pick up my book for a minute. I don't know about all of you watching, but I'm really particular with keeping my books nice. Unless I buy it secondhand. If I buy it new, I try to keep it looking new. I don't like to crease the binding or anything. And then you're going to want to pull that in. That's what makes this adjustable. It's a great fit for this book. Look, oh, it's so pretty. And now my book will stay clean. Look at that. That's wonderful. I'm really pleased with this. What a fun project. If you're not babysitting a bunch of dogs, you can do it a lot faster than me. I hope you've enjoyed making the Kimberbell Petals Prose book cover with me. It looks wonderful. I'm going to be filming more from the Bookish projects. There's also book coasters and corner bookmarks, and each one of the projects has bonus designs. Let's take a sneak peek at the bonus design that comes with the book cover. This is your bonus design. It says just one more chapter. They show it on a quilted pillow. They make these quilted pillow blanks. I will make a project with this. Make sure you subscribe to my channel so you don't miss it. This is the first of the Bookish projects I'm uploading, so stay tuned for the rest. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope this tutorial was helpful. Bye, everybody.